Hi, everyone. Today we'll be wrapping up our lectures for the semester by looking at the end of our third and final book, The Rich Get Richer and the Poor Get Prison. So today, what I'm going to do with the lecture is basically divide it up into three different parts. The first part being the recap, reminding ourselves about the thesis, the main argument being put forth throughout the book, and then getting into a brief recap of our last class, during which we talked about the first part of your book report. And then the next two parts of the lecture for today will get into the last two parts of the book report. First, looking at the different pathways in the criminal justice system based upon one's class position, and then getting into how you can change the system if you want it to become more effective. Get into how you can change the system if you want it to minimize the existence of class bias. And again, that will tie into the last part of your final book report. So again, just to remind ourselves of the thesis, basically we're looking at how the criminal justice system as an institution, how it's organized, actually works against the non-wealthy, thus it works for the wealthy. The way the system's organized, it advantages the wealthy, it disadvantages the non-wealthy. That's the main argument being put forth throughout the book. And we saw a little bit of that last class when we looked at the white collar crimes that often go unseen, unnoticed, and often, relatively speaking, lightly punished. And we looked at the harm that it does for society as a whole. And also, we looked at the motivations behind a lot of the white collar crime, so the rich can get richer. And so, we also talk about the subthesis throughout the book is that the system itself is ineffective. So, in addition to the class bias being evident in the criminal justice system, the system itself is ineffective because it operates to reproduce crime rates rather than reducing them. So, we'll come back to these two theses at the end of our lecture today when we come back to the final part of our book report. So, last class, we centered our attention on how the white collar crime again fits our definitions of crime, something that's against the law, something that's harmful for society, but it really doesn't match how we think about it or ideas of crime. So when we think about crime as being the blue collar types, criminals being the blue collar criminals, that creates us a blind spot where we tend to ignore the white collar criminals, where we tend to ignore the white collar crime. And then we got into kind of specific categories of white collar crime, whether it be at work, the different types of pollutions and the food that we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe, or whether it be within the healthcare system. And the numbers, again, are very staggering in the sense that they're much higher than most people would anticipate. And so, again, a lot of this white collar crime goes on. It typically goes unseen, undiscussed. And again, that motivation behind a lot of it is to make more money or to save money, whether it be taking shortcuts at work, putting these additives in the food, or whether it be prescribing drugs that maybe don't need to be prescribed. The motivations again are to save money, to make money. The rich get richer when it comes to white collar crime and being kind of marginalized within the criminal justice system. So now we can get into the first reading today. So I know there's a lot of kind of text right there on the slide, but basically we're looking at the criminal justice system when people kind of encounter it. And when they encounter it, you start to see two different pathways emerging. The wealthy, the rich kind of take one pathway through the system compared to the non-wealthy, the non-rich, they take a different pathway. So overall, kind of jump down to the bottom of the slide here. We would like to believe that once people encounter the system at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end, you would like to think that they are judged, they are evaluated based upon what they did, based upon the impact of what they did for society. But typically you don't see that. More so, it becomes about your class background, and that class background really matters when it comes to experiencing the system like this or experiencing the system like that. The same type of activity, the same crime perhaps, but different experiences when you encounter, when you go through, and when you kind of conclude the system. So you can kind of start at the encountering part. You can see, and I like the statistics being shown to us. I like the different use of data to kind of inform the reader of, kind of what's going on. And so here we're looking at how, at the beginning, the non-wealthy are much more likely to get arrested and charged compared to the wealthy. And again, we're talking about uh, similar activities, the same types of activities going on. But what you see more often than not, so wealthy people, and compared to non-wealthy people, will get a pass. They'll get kind of a slap on the shoulder. Don't do it again. Compared to the non-wealthy individual, more likely will be booked, more likely will be arrested for the activity. And so, why is this? So it's not only to recognize kind of the difference. The non-wealthy are more likely to get arrested and charged than the wealthy, but kind of what's going on to create this gap between the two. And so we can look at a few factors, one being police methods. The policing methods basically, when you're focusing on the blue collar crime, when you focus on only the blue collar criminals, you tend to ignore the white collar crime. You tend to ignore the white collar criminals. So it's just as simple as, if you're not looking for something, then most likely you're not going to find it. But on the other hand, if you are looking for something, most likely you're going to find it. So here's one factor that kind of creates the variable of class being an influential variable when it comes to being arrested and charged for the activity. If somebody's breaking curfew, if somebody's drinking underage, if somebody is driving under the influence, but you're not trying to find those people, and then you're not going to find them. But on the other hand, if somebody's doing it and you're looking for it, then you're going to be able to find it. So that kind of ties into the second part here, the methods. You start to see heavier police presence in the working and lower class areas compared to the police presence in the middle and upper class areas. The presence is more proactive in the working and lower class areas. You're going to go out and you're going to find something if you're looking for it, compared to it's more reactive in the middle and upper class areas, where if something occurs, we're going to respond to that, but we're not going to try to get ahead of it. And we're not going to be looking for it. So again, we're not going to find it. So like the first policing method, if you're looking for the blue collar criminal, then perhaps you'll be able to find him. But if you're not looking for him, then you won't. So therein lies the disparity where you are looking for blue collar criminals, but not looking for white collar criminals. So it shouldn't surprise us that there's a disparity that emerges as a result. And then criminal stereotypes kind of tie into this as well. So, overall, um, often the middle and upper class individual is kind of given the benefit of the doubt that this is a one-time mistake, one-time slip up. Kids is trying to have fun being kids, so they're give them kind of the pat on the back. They're good kids. It's up to a little trouble. Make sure that they won't do it again in the future. Where the working and lower class kids are often defined as bad kids. So it's just not kids being kids. It's just not, doing something for, one time thing. It's somebody who's kind of bad at heart. And, we need to punish these people. We need to make them face the consequences for those actions. So again, studies kind of show that we consider the working and lower class individuals more deviant compared to the middle and upper class, and we tend to respond to them in the same manner. If you think somebody's a deviant, you're going to try to respond to that. Where if you think somebody is just a person who slipped up, kid just being a kid, you're more likely kind of give them the benefit of the doubt. And another factor that kind of ties into this would be kind of who people know. So, often if you're part of kind of a upper class, middle class family in a community, People kind of know your families. People know perhaps a parent, and again, that kind of helps you out. I know your dad; he's a good person. I know your mom. I had her, kindergarten or something like that. And then they'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Compared to the working and lower class families, typically you don't have those same connections with local government, and so you're not going to be able to, have somebody vouch for you because they know a parent or they know your family. So it's another factor that kind of comes into all this. So again, separately, you can see how these things work, but again, all together to kind of create this variable of the non-wealthy being much more likely arrested and charged for the criminal activity compared to the wealthy individuals. And so, kind of within the system, conviction rates. Conviction rates, basically, again, you can divide it up to saying that the non-wealthy individual is much more likely to get convicted of a crime compared to a wealthy individual. So again, we can look at different factors here. Um, Money is kind of a key factor in both examples. Money for lawyers. So I always like to take the time here to say that we should not talk down on or look down on public defenders. Public defenders play a very important role in the criminal justice system, but they have a lot on their plate. They're juggling multiple cases, multiple balls in the air at once, compared to if you can hire your own personal lawyer. Your case, you yourself, you're going to get more attention and you're going to have more resources. So overall, you're going to be better off if you have a lawyer, a team of workers that's focusing on your case primarily, compared to if you have the public defendant trying to juggle multiple cases at once. The time is not going to simply be there to give you the attention that you need to perhaps help you out in your overall outcome, being convicted or being not. And so, like money for lawyers, money for bail is an important factor here, where basically you see the longer people will stay in jail following being arrested, basically the more likely you're going to plead guilty. And so there's kind of, like I say, kind of a psychological weight. The longer you stay in jail, the more likely you want to get out of there. And one way you can get out of there is plead guilty to the crime. And so, again, if you can afford bail, then you're not going to have that cognitive weight on your mind in terms of trying to maybe plead guilty to something and that you're not guilty of, or plead guilty to something that maybe you can get off of if you actually go to a trial. So, money is a key factor when it comes to kind of being in the middle of the game, going to trial, getting out on bail or not. And so finally, kind of at the end of the game, being sentenced. And so again, you should probably understand where we're going to go here. The same ways, the same pathways we talked about before. The non-wealthy are much more likely to get sentenced, to have longer sentences. Again, we're talking about kind of the same type of crimes compared to the wealthy. So again, we can go to criminal stereotypes. Despite the harm being done to society, to people, the white collar criminals are often given, relatively speaking, a slap on the wrist compared to the blue collar criminals, all things considered. And, likewise, we go back to kind of the doctor or the CEO. They're not seen as kind of bad people, but maybe somebody a little greedy, a little money hungry, and perhaps somewhere people will say that, oh, we can relate to that a little bit. You're going to punish them, but not that badly, because we don't really think the crime itself is that bad. But again, if you look at the impact of it on people, on society overall, the white collar crimes are just as bad, maybe in some cases even worse, compared to a lot of the blue collar crimes that go through the system. So again, we're not talking about murders and things like that, but the majority of the blue collar crimes that go through the system have nothing to do with murders. So more about kind of individual crimes, domestic disputes, um, robberies, drug offenses, so on and so on. So, yes, maybe selling drugs is against the law, but is the harm that you do uh, in the same ballpark compared to the harm of a lot of white collar crimes that we discussed earlier. So, in addition to kind of the different psychologies around the criminal stereotypes leading to different sentences, we also see this divide being created by money again. So, just as we touched on, the money for lawyers. If you have your own lawyer, your own team of lawyers, they can help negotiate perhaps a shorter sentence, perhaps probation. And so, again, you have these different resources at hand compared to if you're going with a public defendant who can't have the same amount of resources, who doesn't have the same amount of time to focus on your case, and perhaps won't get you as a shorter sentence, that won't get you that probation instead of being sentenced overall. So again, here we see the two different pathways. So for that second part of your paper, go into the book, find examples of how this operates. And that would be basically how you want to approach, how you address that second part of the paper. So now turning to the third part of the paper, the final part of the book, we can looking at changing the system. So I always appreciate when the authors not only talk about problems, but talk about solutions. So if you kind of recognize how things are broken and why they're broken, then you should be able to recognize how we can fix things as well. So here they talk about kind of changing the system to make it more effective. So rather than reproducing crime, you can actually reduce it, and also trying to minimize or perhaps eliminate the class bias involved when it comes to the white collar versus blue collar, when it comes to the different pathways in the criminal justice system. So, let me talk about that, then I'll get into kind of the beginning of the slide here. So overall, again, we can talk about, two different things that you want to change uh, in terms of the institutional organization. And one thing would be related to eliminating the class bias. And there you can get into providing quality counsel to all individuals. So, the lawyer being public or private, shouldn't matter. Everybody should have access to high quality defenses. And that could help eliminate the class biases when it comes to some of those different pathways we just talked about. Um, Talk about how, the punishment should fit the crime rather than the punishment should fit the class position of the individual committing the crime. So basically, it's something that's very harmful for society. Um, it shouldn't be, person A or person B doing it. That should be irrelevant. If it's harmful for society, you should treat everybody in the same way when you're addressing the crime. And then another way you can eliminate class bias would be basically you start to reconceptualize how you do your policing. So, don't solely focus on one class when looking for crime because you're going to find it. And don't ignore another class when it comes to looking for crime because you're not going to find it. So it's going to pay more mind, pay attention to all types of criminal activity, all types that do harm to society and that do harm to society members. And when you start to kind of focus on crime in terms of how we define it rather than how we think about it, then we start to focus more on criminals throughout the class spectrum rather than criminals more related to the working and lower class positions. And so another issue you want to address if you want to make the system a better system is to reduce the crime rather than reproducing it. And so here we kind of go back to the first lecture we talked about. Basically, if you know the sources of crime, you need to address those sources. So, in other words, if you know this thing here is creating a higher likelihood of crime, then you need to address this thing here so you can minimize the likelihood of crimes being committed. So, whether it be providing quality education to individuals, providing quality work opportunities to individuals, quality health care for individuals. So you're addressing the issue rather than trying to address the person after the fact. So you want to address the addiction. You want to address the low education levels. You want to address the lack of job opportunities, and in doing so, You're not going to wipe crime off the map, but you will be able to reduce crime rates rather than reducing them. On the other hand, if you're simply going to ignore the sources of crime, what actually promotes crimes going on, then you're also going to ignore reducing it and simply reproduce the crime rates overall. So, that's what we're looking at there in terms of changing the organization to make it more effective, to make it a more just system. And so, again, go into the book and kind of find some examples of that. Here's the change, and here's why the change would help. So, that's what we're looking for in that final part of the paper. So, let me jump back up to the top of the slide here and basically say that the change is tough to occur. And there's a kind of a paradox that kind of creates a barrier of changing the system. So, on the one hand, you know, people think they kind of they think one thing works when actually something else works. So the thinking about crime doesn't really match what we know about crime. And this kind of gets into what I talked about a little bit, in the sense that we think the right thing to do is to punish people hard, lock them up, throw away the key, get harder laws on the book. And this will take care of the issues. This will take care of the criminals and the criminal activity. That's what we kind of think about. Again, the studies show, research shows us that's not the case. What we know works is not being hard on crime. You're not locking somebody up and throwing away the key. But it's actually, again, addressing the known problems, the addiction of the individual, the lack of formal education to get decent paying jobs, or overall opportunities to access quality health care, and all those things we know kind of works when it comes to reducing crime. But if we tend to think something else rather than kind of what we know, that paradox is going to simply perpetuate the things are. Crime will be reproduced, the system will change or will not change, it will remain the same. And so this ties into kind of elections as well. You never kind of hear politicians say, well, I want to take your tax money and really put it into addiction programs in prisons. Because we know if we treat addiction, we treat the problem, then they'll be less likely to go out there and commit the same crimes. But that won't win you an election. What wins you an election is when you go out there and you want to come across as hard and tough on crime. And I'm going to take your tax dollars, but rather than treating the illness to the criminal, I'm going to build more prisons with it. And so people are more likely to vote for that kind of hard approach compared to a more personalized approach, even though the personalized approach is much more effective at reducing crime. So that's kind of one part why changing the system's hard. There's this kind of a stalemate between kind of what we think works and what really works and what wins the policymakers, the lawmakers, the elections. And so finally, we can also look at who has the ability to change the system and who has the desire to change it. So basically, here again, the paradox is those who have the power to change the system, they lack the desire to. The system really doesn't impact them, doesn't really impact their community around them. Sometimes, again, the wealthy are advantage of the system. So why would you want to take your advantage away? And so you have the power to change it, but you lack the motivation too. Because for you, the system works just fine. And for the system, disadvantaging people, those people are not the people around you. They live in different areas and they go to different restaurants. Their kids go to different schools. So, compared to, on the other hand, where people have the motivation to change the system, you've indirectly experienced injustice. You directly experienced injustice. You kind of see the injustice around you. And so you recognize how the system is broken. So you have that motivation because you kind of recognize it, and you recognize the negative influences it can have on people and communities, but you lack the actual power to change it. So there again is the paradox where you have the desire to change it, but you don't actually have the power to change it. So again, here are some suggestions, but implementing these suggestions are sometimes tough because of these different paradoxical barriers that exist when it comes to change as a whole. So that's where I'll leave it at for today. As always, kind of take these lectures in reference to the report. That should kind of give you a good heads up in terms of what you should be doing and how you should be doing it. But always feel free to email me with questions. Always feel free to email me drafts of your paper, full drafts, half drafts. I'm more than happy to look at anything you send me. And overall, since it is that kind of last lecture of the semester, I want to say, thank you for being good students. I know for some students, it was a tough semester. For all of us, it wasn't the easiest semester, but for the most part, I think things went smoothly given our circumstances. And so give yourselves a pat on the back for getting through the semester. And hopefully, sooner than later, we can move kind of onward and upward with our education here. So again, thanks for everything. And I always like to say, always feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about further courses in sociology, or if you have any questions about anything in general about university life. I'm more than happy to talk to you uh, and kind of just give you any help that perhaps that you would like to receive. So I'll leave that there. And again, if you have any questions about the paper, please let me know.